for those of you who are prone to copious note-taking, I want you to relax. You don't have to take any notes. If anything I say is so exciting that you want to get it down, I do have the book for sale. My goal is not to sell the book, my goal is to inform you about the Krag, or Krag, and I'll use that interchangeably. But feel free, if you find something that's particularly interesting, to purchase the book. I am selling it at a reduced price, primarily, well, because you're my compatriots in this club, and secondly, I've written a second book.
Okay.
And I need to make room in my house for the second book, which I've completed the writing of. It's in the hands of my daughter and her husband, who are the smarter ones with the new technology, and so they're doing the paging and the page design and so on. And that's on the U.S. military entrenching tools, Civil War to World War I. I thought it was going to be a pamphlet. Turns out to be about a 500-page book. There are almost 100 tools once you get the experimental tools in there. So at any rate, I need to make room. But so I'd be delighted to sell this essentially cost.
Okay, great.
Tonight.
Thank you. I'll complete a bit.
Okay. What I'd like to do tonight is really just give you a timeline so you have some historical perspective of the Krags. 1890 was a key year. The Adjutant General appointed a board of officers, and I'm going to use this quote. Quote, to consider and recommend a suitable magazine system for rifles and carbines for the military service. End quote. This is the time of the magazine system that they were developing. 53 guns were subjected to the trial, and the Krag-Jorgensen from Norway was selected in 1892. At the same time, 1892, this board of officers was also requested to report on the sights and bayonets of the 53 trial guns. This report was sent to a subsequent board of officers who recommended a knife bayonet similar to the bayonet used on the Swiss magazine rifle, pattern of 1889. Now, I'm going to be relatively brief in my report, oral report, because I'd really like you to come up here and look more closely at some of these things which you can't appreciate perhaps from the distance. But I do have a nice picture. This is the so-called 1899 Swiss bayonet. This is the Krag bayonet. So even from a distance, you can see that we essentially took their bayonet. There are some differences, and you can see that when you come up closer. There are more differences in the scabbard. But so that's how we got the Norwegian rifle and the Swiss bayonet. And this report was approved in 1893. I do have to use some notes. Pardon me for that. Because I've been working for the last 3 years on this entrenching tool book, I have so many dates in my head, I can't keep them straight anymore. It may have something to do with my age, but I need the notes. In 1894, then, is the key date. The Krag rifle and bayonet was first issued to the 4th Infantry at Fort Sherman, Idaho, October 6, 1894. So we're going to start with the Krag knife bayonet, 4 different ones. The knife, the cadet, the Bowie, and the Bolo. And I'll briefly talk about each. From October 6, 1894 to April 1st, 1895, which is approximately 6 months, the blade, guard, and pommel of the bayonet was blued. Very hard to find them blued, originally blued, because after the 6 months and they decided we're not going to blue it, they were returned and reprocessed or whatever, and the bluing was taken off. Why did they not like the blue? Because it did kind of look neat with the blue uniform of the Army at that time. 2 reasons. It affected the temper of the blade. The bluing affected the temper of the blade, so they didn't want to do it for that. And also they knew that taking it in and out of the scabbard would soon ruin the perfect blue, and then it would look mediocre at best. So they decided, let's make a bright blade. So it's hard to find original blued Krag bayonets. In 1899, there were 2 significant modifications to the Krag bayonet. The walnut scales, and you'll see on the blued blade, and this one, which is, by the way, this is a bright blade, 1894, to show you, the blued and the bright. You're more likely to find a bright. First of all, 1894s are hard to find to begin with. They only made about 750. in 1894. So that's hard to find even in a bright blade, let alone blue. But at any rate, initially, the scales were sanded smooth, they looked nice, and the rivets were nicely, what do they call it? They're flat and then, you know, nice and in even alignment with the scales. But as it started to get toward the Spanish-American War, they didn't have the time to be quite so fancy. So in 1899, you'll see the scales. When you can't see this from where you are, but you're welcome to come up later. There are certain ridges, the milling ridges in the wood are noticeable, and they peened the rivets as opposed to making them flush, was the word I couldn't think of a moment ago. They no longer made the rivets flush with the washers. So those are the major modifications to the knife bayonet. So from 1894 to 1903, Krag bayonets were manufactured, and the total manufacture is approximately 410,000. More difficult than the blade was the scabbard situation. 6 different scabbards were manufactured during this time period. And they are here in chronological order and here in the body, so to speak. I'll just quickly mention the reasons why I have that written down. I have a page number for that, and I'll get that in a second. Okay. To start with, the original scabbard had a tapered mouth, meaning you could put the bayonet in only one direction. Not a good idea if you're being fired upon and you want to put the blade away quickly. What are you going to do? If it doesn't go in quickly because you don't have it in the right position, you're throwing it away. So they pretty quickly found out that's not such a good idea. But the original scabbards have a tapered mouth, and it's tapered, for those of you who like numbers, from 9/30 seconds to 7/30 seconds. It really takes a pretty good eye to see the taper. But if you come up, and you're welcome to pick these up, of course, and look at them, you'll see it. It is tapered slightly. It's only 1/16 of an inch. And the first hook could rotate 360 degrees. First modification in July 15th, 1895, they changed the mouthpiece from a taper to a rectangular opening. So it didn't take them long to realize, we need a rectangular opening. And I have that, of course. Second modification, here's another thing that's difficult to see until you come up. The early scabbards had a squared configuration at the bend at the top of the hook. Even those are fairly hard to find. But, and as I say, well, this is August 3rd, 1895, they changed the squared configuration to a much more rounded configuration. Why? Because the squared configuration was fraying the cartridge belt. So, well, as I see these things happening, okay, we got to change it. And the rounded configuration, which you can see, is a better deal. In April 17th, 1897, they put a pin at the bottom of the washer here so that you couldn't have a 360-degree rotation. The oscillation is 50 degrees to either side, or 100 degrees oscillation of the scabbard, so that the blade was less likely to fall out. But even that wasn't fully effective. So on July 22nd, 1899, they changed the hook to a much more secure double wire latch. At least you're not going to lose the whole thing when it comes out of the cartridge belt. This would hold it securely in the cartridge belt. And then the last one, they also changed the stop from a pin to a lug and notch, which again, you can't see unless you come up close. A lot of people have said, your book has saved me so much money because now I know which scabbard goes with my bayonet and I know which one to look for. Most people don't know that there's 6 different scabbards. So it's kind of nice to know if you're a Krag collector. And the last modification, they lengthened the hook and placed the 2 wires closer together. Some of you are so erudite that you probably know why. Anybody know why?
For the 1903 cartridge belt.
That's correct. They wanted, it's now 1905. April 15th, 1905. And they wanted a scabbard that could fit both the Krag cartridge belt and the 1903 cartridge belt. So this is the modification for that. So those are the scabbards for the Krag knife bayonet. Now let's go to that's the longest one out of the four, so we're moving along. The Krag cadet bayonet. March 28, 1896, the Krag rifle was issued to the cadets at West Point with a cadet bayonet approximately 3 inches shorter and weighing approximately 3 ounces less. There are two variations. I have both. One is dated 1895, which you'll see as you come up if you wish, and one 1900. They're both quite rare because they only made approximately 400 of them each. And I guess the 1895 is a little more rare, or less common, if you will, because it's a few years earlier, and I think they made just a few less, but they're both kind of difficult to find. Again, the first one has the smooth scales and the smooth rivets. This one has the rough scales and the peened rivets. Again, when you come up, you can take a look at that. So that's the difference with them. There are 5 scabbard variations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all here. The only thing I'll draw your attention to, they're not too different from those except for the one with the Hartman attachment. Hartman attachment has this leather, just because I think it looked cool with the uniform of the cadets. And there is something else I wanted to mention on that. By the way, here's a picture of General Hartman, who came up with that, and I actually have his patent down here. But here's what he says about his invention. This is a quote from his discussion of it. The advantages of this invention are, the swinging of the bayonet and scabbard in rapid movements is prevented, and much consequent wear and tear is avoided. The bayonet is held close to the person and is not so liable to fall from the scabbard. And when the wearer sits down, the scabbard is readily turned out of the way and is not liable to be broken. So there's your reason for the Hartman scabbard. And let's see, just a brief further comment on, we have a gentleman here. We're honored to have a gentleman who graduated from West Point. What is your name, sir?
John Miller.
Okay, here he is, distinguished looking gentleman, and he says, oh, I remember this, because he's a graduate of West Point. He said, I graduated in 1962, and this was the bayonet we had, and that's true. This was discontinued in 1963. Why did they go to that? Okay, you ask. In 1903, the Springfield was issued to cadets with the ramrod bayonet, as you may know, and then later with the knife bayonet. But the Krag bayonet returned to West Point in March of 1910. And I'm sure most of you would be delighted to know why. I have a quote for that too. By the way, this book is considered the definitive book on the Krags. My wife and I spent 3.5 years doing research, most of it down in Washington, D.C. So this is documented, and these are quotes from actual documents. Here's what the superintendent of the academy, a Colonel Scott, sent the following letter to the Adjutant General November 8th, 1909. And I'm not going to read the whole letter, but I'm going to read one paragraph because it explains why they went back to the Krag. The present bayonet, which was the 1905, hangs down from the tip of the waist belt 22 1/2 inches and is entirely too long for the shorter cadets of B, C, D, and E companies, many of whom have not nearly attained their full growth. The Corps of Cadets, when equipped with the knife bayonet, has always had a smaller one than the regulation. It is believed that the metal scabbard of the model 1898 would be much more in keeping with the cadet uniform than the regulation leather-covered scabbard. So that's the justification for this particular model. And the standard length Krag bayonet was subsequently issued to cadets from 1910 to the 1963 date with 3 modifications. It wasn't long before they realized, let's really be cool. So they chromed the blade, and that's June 1930. So in June of 1930, they chromed the blade. The blued scabbard, it's hard to tell, but when you come up, was changed to a painted black scabbard so as to more clearly, or to look better on the uniform, which had that black line down the trousers. And the third modification was the wood grips were secured by a bolt and nut assembly. When you come up here, you can see that, instead of the rivets. Now, there's an interesting story, and I'm just going to, this is be a little bit of an aside, but I'm well within my time, I think. My wife and I, we really wanted to know, when did they change to this bolt and nut assembly? Because it was just nagging at us, and for years, it took us 3.5 years to do the whole book, but for years, we couldn't find a date for that. And we were told by many people in Washington, D.C. at the Archive, oh, you'll never find it. Never find it. It's too minor a thing. And I was ready to give up. But I have a wife who is not so ready to give up. So we continued to look. And we didn't find it in Archives 1, which is in Washington, D.C. We had to go to Archives 2, which is in College Park. And they have the later, what was the date? Do you remember? From World War I on, maybe, or something, I don't know, but they have later date stuff, and we did eventually find it, and it's 1939, and I have on page 158, I actually have the document which gave us the answer, which I think is cool, and I owe my wife, you know, the honor of having found that, but it says right in the document, and the document is dated February 8th, 1939. The screws are replacing the grip rivets and nuts are replacing the washers. So there was the definitive answer to that question. So we did find that out, which I thought was interesting. Okay, almost everybody's favorite Krag bayonet is the Krag Bowie. I mean, it's a beautiful, aesthetically pleasing blade. Useless for what they intended, but beautiful. And I'll go into that in just a minute. Probably as a result of the Spanish-American War in April and August 1898, there was heightened interest in developing an entrenching tool to be carried by the individual soldier. The Board of Ordnance and Fortification examined many tools and decided upon what was then called a combination knife bayonet and entrenching tool in late 1899, and they designed it, the Board of Ordnance and Fortification. The design was approved by the Chief of Ordnance, and 2,000 Krag bayonets were officially manufactured in 1899 and 1900. All are dated 1900. I say officially because that's what you'll find in most books, about 2,000, because 1,500 were sent to the Philippines in November of 1900, and 500 were sent to Cuba for trial, so that's 2,000. But being the stickler for evidence that I am, to my chagrin sometimes, I found in the payroll records of that time period, the month and the year, how many they put together. They call it assembly. Entrenching knives, entrenching knives, entrenching. At any rate, it comes to closer to 4,000. Now, were those 4,000 all good? Maybe not. Maybe a couple thousand were poorly made and they threw them away, so they only had two. I don't know. That I don't know. But I would say that there probably were more than 2,000 made, manufactured, probably closer to 4,000. Some may have been discarded for one reason or another. But they're still quite rare, even 4,000 in 1900. One of my favorite pictures is the blueprint of the Bowie. And I have to give you a little bit of an aside here too. When you go to the archives in Washington, D.C., they come out with boxes about this long, maybe this narrow, and everything's folded to the nth degree, and you may have
a couple of hundred.
Maybe 100 or so of these little things. You take it out. Is this what I want? No, no good. Is that not? All right, we come up with this. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to the archives in Washington, D.C. They're very carefully monitored, the archives, as they should be. But we come up with this, and I'm opening it up, and This is 1901. I may be the first person looking at this in 100 years. I don't know, but not a lot of people have. So as you open it up, it's crinkling a little. Now you have to remember, this is in the archives, Washington, D.C. There are as many guards there as there are people. And any noise, people come over, you know, to watch what you're doing. So here I am opening up this crinkling, and I'm not the most gentle of people, probably. So I let my wife do it, basically. But we open this up, and it takes up, you know, probably this much on the table, maybe more. And, you know, we're aghast at the fact that we found the blueprint for the Krag Bowie. I mean, that's fantastic. I couldn't sleep that night. But to take a picture of it is not easy. So she had a device such as this with a nice tripod and so on. But you have to put it maybe up on the table to get the height and so on. At any rate, it was a process. And everybody's watching us, and the sound. And you can see, when you come up, you can see that it's been folded many, many times. But at any rate, it was quite an exciting experience to find that. And I think it's a beautiful
And
picture.
folding at the back the way you found it was,
Oh, yes.
was a real treat.
Yes, yes. She's more likely to remember things like that because she's a woman. But yeah, it was not easy. Now, I have in my book the field reports on the Krag Bowie bayonet. As I said, these were experimental. So there are, I have 60, 70, about 15 or 20 pages of trial reports in the appendix on the Krag Bowie. And I'm not going to bore you with that, but I think you might like to know what the soldiers liked and what they didn't like. So, what did they like? When you come up here, you can see that it's actually sharpened. The back of the blade is sharpened for about 2.5 inches. You'll see that when you're closer. So they liked the sharpened knife edge, you know, for maybe kindling or cutting a rope, whatever you have to do in camp. They liked the wider blade, they liked the better balance, and they liked the shorter blade. What didn't they like? The delicateness of the point of the blade, the lightness and the fragileness of the entire blade. The poor quality of the steel, which would not hold an edge. So once it got dull, it was tough to really sharpen it. They didn't like the overly strong scabbard spring to get it out of the scabbard, and they didn't like the noisy clanking of the steel scabbard. If you're trying to sneak up on somebody, you don't want a lot of noise. So they like some things, they dislike certain things. The Board of Ordnance recommended against adoption of the tool in 1902. Keep in mind that the Board of Ordnance designed it. Now, anyone who's ever done any digging, even in your garden, you know that's not going to work. It's maybe better than a long blade, but it's not a great blade. But remember, this is the ordnance guys. They probably are all generals. They haven't been in the field in 20 years, I guess. But I'm glad they did it because it's a beautiful bayonet, and I'm delighted to have it in my collection. And I'm very, you know, enamored of it because of its design and so on. But it isn't a great entrenching tool, clearly. So, because of its failure as an entrenching tool, they came up with the Krag Bolo. Much heavier, much better tool for what they had planned. December 1901, Captain Wise was an officer in the Philippines, and he recognized the value and the effectiveness of the native bolo, and really the fecklessness or ineffectiveness of the Krag and the Bowie and the knife bayonet. So he sent, what he did was he had somebody weld the native bolo into the handle of the Krag knife bayonet and sent the bolo bayonet through channels to the Army Ordnance Office. I think we ought to make a few of these, he said. The fabricated bolo bayonet is still in the Museum of American History in the Smithsonian. And here it is. This is the one he sent from the Philippines. Now, the Smithsonian didn't know it until we told them, because the documentation was such that we found documentation that talks about the enclosure 1 of this, whatever, this is it. And he talks about, I have welded, let me get the, show you this. I have welded the blade of a Philippine bolo into the Krag hilt. And while you can't see it from here, you can when you come up, there's the weld. It's actually the weld. You can see it. He welded it, and this is the one. So this is the prototype of one of the scarcest U.S. military bayonets. In 1902, they made 50 Krag Bolo bayonets, and 48 were issued to the Philippines for trial in July of 1902. So if 50 were made and 48 were sent to the Philippines, you have to ask yourself, how many came back? If it was for trial, probably, take a guess, I don't know, 25, maybe, half of them? But that was in 1902, 1903, 1904. How many are left now? That's what makes this one of the rarest, if not the rarest, U.S. military bayonet, Krag Bolo. I can tell you where there are about 8, and I know all the primary collectors of Krags. So I think there may be 8 left, maybe more, but not many more. So it's very rare. The field reports on the Krag Bolo bayonet take up 30 pages in an appendix, and this is my last point. The soldiers liked the broad blade. They liked the heft and durability. You can see, if you're allowed to come up and hold it gently. The balance they liked. They liked the utility and the versatility, and this is a little macabre perhaps. They liked the fact that you could easily withdraw it from a body, because it made enough of a wound going in that it wasn't hard to get out. And there are many reports of this bayonet going into an enemy, and while you're trying to get it out, you've been attacked by another enemy. So they liked the fact that this could be easily withdrawn. What did they dislike? The short grip. It's a little heavy. The heaviness when affixed to the rifle. You figure if this is a bayonet on the end of a rifle, this is 1 pound, 5 ounces. So, you know, it's going to be muzzle heavy for sure. And they again didn't like the poor quality of the steel, which would not hold an edge. In 1903, they made 6 additional Krag Bolo bayonets, marked 1903, for experimentation as entrenching tools. And that's, of course, even rarer. If they made 6 in 1903, how many are left now? I may have the only one. The Krag Bolo bayonet was generally well liked by the troops, but could not be used on the early 1903 Springfields because ramrod bayonet. So the 1903, when it first came out, had the ramrod bayonet. So you weren't going to be able to affix something like that. And then they got to the 1905 the knife bayonet and so on. So it was never mass produced, and that's why it's exceedingly rare. And I also included, in World War I, as you know, we were somewhat unprepared initially, and there were a lot of Krag bayonets around. So a lot of the guys took a knife bayonet, cut off some of the blade. Some of them have added a little, what do you call it? What's the, they use to fill it with?
Lead.
Lead, thank you. They filled they cut off part of the guard, filled it with lead to give it that heft. And so this is a typical trench World War I Krag modified, you know, for that time period. That's it. Any questions? Sir?
Why did they just not adopt why did they just adopt the original bayonet they wanted to gun? What was different about the Danish and Norwegian bayonet as opposed to the...
That's a good question. They had, I think I have in here the actual, what they, maybe I can give you a real good answer, but it's probably in here someplace. They tried the 53, they looked at 53 of these bayonets with the guns, and they liked the length, they liked the, are you asking me how is it different?
The original bayonet, I think, is pretty much almost like the Mauser rifle. It has there's a piece on the barrel that snaps. It doesn't have a ring.
Yes.
The U.S. wanted a ring around the muzzle.
I guess they just want, they look, you know, for security, how is it working, how does it feel, what's it look like, that. I don't know if I remember exactly, and it's probably in here someplace, but again, my focus has been on the entrenching tools lately, so that's a good question, I'm not sure. Sir?
We were discussing the cadet bayonet, the final version, and you said it was modified, so that went onto an 03 Springfield? They were using a Krag bayonet on an 03 Springfield?
This actually worked on everything up to and including the Garand. Was that your question?
Yeah.
Yes, up to and including the Garand. The M14, it would not work for. Hence, in 1963, they discontinued this. But yes, it would work on the 03. I don't know about the 1917.
Yes, it should.
No.
Probably not.
No.
But the cadets probably never use that.
The 0383, I think it'll go on an M1 rifle.
Yes, in the M1 Garand, it does fit.
M1, 0383, and an 03 won't go on, the 1917 bayonet won't go on.
Right.
Now, were they ever issued with the 03?
I'm sorry?
Were they ever issued with the 03?
You know, you'd have to look at the cadet history, probably. They did, as I say, it went from 1910 to 1963, not always, initially it wasn't chromed. I gave you the date for when they chromed it, but this was the bayonet they used, again, because they liked the metal scabbard, and they liked the fact that it wasn't quite as long as the 1905 bayonet. I would invite all of you to come up and take a look at some of these nuances that you can't see from there. Oh, was there another question?
Yeah, well, I just wanted clarification. So without any additional modification, you could put that Krag bayonet on any of those rifles?
Yeah.
On the 03, yeah, the Krag, the 03 Springfield, and the Garand. Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The Krag was invented originally in Norway, but Denmark was the first to use it in their military.
I don't know who was the first. That's a good question.
But also, what did the Norwegians use for bayonets? Did they have any of these Bolo bayonets?
I don't think they did. I don't think they had anything like the Bowie or the Bolo. Again, I invite you all up. I can help you. You know, if you want to look at the tapered opening or anything, feel free to carefully take a look at these bayonets. Thank you.